How's it going? It's your boy Ferris here with another episode of Great Planners with Great Ideas that you can steal for Cities Skylines gameplay. This week we're going to be talking about Sir Ebenezer Howard, who was a social reformer, urban theorist, and maybe just in my mind, a professional Wilford Brimley impersonator. I mean, look at that mustache. It's majestic. So, Ebenezer Howard was not necessarily just a planner, he was more like a social reformer whose ideas were based around the concept of the city. And what you have to remember about him is that he lived in London. He also spent some time in the United States, but primarily he was doing a lot of his theorizing looking at London in the late 1800s, which was very urban, very dense, very dirty, and it really was the world city at that time. So there was a lot going on, and Jack the Ripper and Charles Dickens type London is what we're really talking about here. So he was very concerned about the life that was being led by people who lived in the cities. He felt that cities should be built in the future to reconnect humans to nature rather than separating and isolating the two. And in this sense, he was very far ahead of his time. And he was also very far ahead of his time in concerns about environmental protections and the social harms that result in the urban environment, the inequality, the iniquity, and just overall what happens when you densely populate a large number of people into a smaller area. He felt that housing was inadequate. He felt that other services were inadequate for this number of people, and felt that if a city could be better designed to reconnect and to provide for everyone and be self-sustaining, the world would just generally be a much better place. So his concept for this whole thing, he put together in a book which he published in about 1898, although it was renamed this and published again later under this title. I forget what the original title was in 1898, but he called it The Garden Cities of Tomorrow. And initially, it was dismissed as utopian, and I think you can see why from this graphic, which is a part of his book. He takes these three concepts, the idea of living in the town, which is basically what we would call the city, living in the country, and then living in this idea of there being a town country. And if you take the time to read through all of these headlines, you'll see that his concept of a town country is sort of the best of both worlds. And that's what he's trying to do, is create this perfect mix of urban and country living through this concept of a garden city. So what is the garden city? We're going to look at it in segments. All right. Ultimately, it starts with a central piece, which he called the garden, although it really looks more like a roundabout, and I don't know if it actually needs to be literally a garden, but it's certainly the central point. But from that point radiate roads, and also circular roads in circles around this center point. So this is one sort of pie slice that we're going to look at for right now, and then break it out and look at the whole pie. The obvious pieces of that is this central park area right around the center, these larger avenues here, the Grand Avenue here at this point. And although you probably can't read it, these are actually buildings and structures, the municipal structures. I think this one is actually meant to be a school that exist here sort of in the central part of the city. And a lot of these areas that are left empty in here are left for residential. All in here, and if you can't read this print, it's a little bit too fuzzy, I'm sorry about that, but these are all industrial. And then here it says allotments, but these are meant to be allotments for smaller agriculture. And then out here beyond this, it would be the railroad line, a central railroad line that goes around this initial city. And then these connectors that go down through the boulevard to connect another part of this, the central parts of the city out to this larger line. And then beyond that, large farms, agriculture, and forest. So this is one segment of that, and of course it's meant to be a full circle. So this would be the circle, sort of in context of the larger region. And as you can see, he actually drew these with such specificity. They're actually done to a scale down here. He had an idea of exactly what population could fit, about how much agricultural land you would need, and just in total how much would be in this central city area here. So 5,000 out here, 1,000 in the center. I mean, this is done to mathematic precision, which we'll get to later why that's so interesting. So here's the larger pie, and this would be that one slice we looked at right in here. And as you can see, he just duplicates it a bunch of times around this central garden and this central park area in the middle here. The railway and all of the farms, forests, and agricultural college, which I guess at the time was probably very important, and other things out beyond that. But it doesn't even stop there. I mean, the idea was to have these interconnected, different garden city ideas all connected with a much larger city. So this could represent a London, and then these other cities being the micropolitan areas, and this in all making up one enormous region. So he was thinking very big, very broad. And again, we're working on a scale. We're working on a very specific and precise scale on exactly how big and exactly what he anticipated for these to be. So what you see here was never actually built, but it was the inspiration for a lot of different planning projects, including it was a great influence on Frederick Law Olmsted, who we looked at in our last planner series episode, the first one. So the closest we get to this being actually built was in Letchworth, which is a city in England, and this concept caught on there first, and they wanted to build something similar to that. So while we don't have the perfect circle that Howard anticipated, we do have kind of something sort of round with a central sort of thing. It's not really a circle, more like a long rectangle, but with a green belt around the outside of it and connections around it to other towns and other communities. The railway doesn't really circle it. It kind of goes here and then goes straight through the middle. But you can see how you don't get to do planning like we do in Cities Skylines with a completely blank map and just start to make it up from nothing. Usually you start with something, and the question is how to make it into something special. So this was the plan, and we're going to see something a little bit more detailed than this. This was 1904, the original plan by Parker and Unwin. They were the ones who were hired to kind of apply Howard's ideas. And this would be your central city area, and you can see the central garden area, so to speak, and then around it they tried to recreate the ideas of Howard as best they could. This is a much better look at their plan, and this map was done just a couple of years after the one you just saw. And what you see here are buildings that existed. It was about 1908 to the best of my knowledge, and you can see exactly what they were anticipating doing. If we go back a couple of maps, if you look at these areas here, the darker gray all through here, this would all be residential. This darker black in here would be retail shopping. This lighter white here, through here, here, and there, all industrial. And then you have your green belt out here, which would be forest and agricultural. And then these are the towns and villages. So that's how they kind of anticipated this going. And when you look at this, you can start to see how they had it take shape. Shops here, this is that central shopping area. Factory sites to let, and there are some existing factories there anyway, it looks like. Here's your railway, residences, and some type of either forest or agriculture already out in that area. So this is how it looks today. Here's that central greenway area. These are all shopping, just like the plan anticipates. And this, I mean, look how well this has been built out into very industrial type development. Lots of residential throughout here, and out this way, this is still sort of forested or possibly small agriculture. And then out this way, even more agricultural down there. So when you look at what was anticipated, shopping, industrial, a little bit of industrial, some residential, and then look at how it is today. They nailed it pretty well, with the exception of, a little bit of industrial I think they wanted over here, but they got the shopping district almost is still that way today, and all the residential built in the middle, and a lot of other aspects of it. So it's a very interesting concept, and because the way Howard did it was so specific mathematically, and he drew the whole concept out with such specificity, it made me think this sort of thing is very doable in City Skylines. So I went ahead and took a shot of just drawing out really quickly a Garden City streetscape. So we're going to jump into a time lapse real quick and show you how I did that and what that would look like. And I'm going to give you some narration so you can see exactly which parts of it I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So I'll see you over there. Let's start with a big central road. This would be the north to south road, which is from which all the other points are going to radiate. And so it's really easy to sort of create a star and then start to draw circles around it, and it makes sort of a bullseye look. So that's easy enough to do. Where it gets tricky is making sure you have enough space in the middle of all these. I mean, here is going to be that central park in between the avenue that I'm drawing right now, and in between that central one, the first circle that I drew. So I want to make sure I have a big enough area to have a really impactful central park. So the circle I'm drawing now is going to be the first of that grand boulevard. And here comes the second part of it. Very close to it, I'm going to draw another one. And you'll notice I'm not using any particular street model at this point. The idea is just to put the circles down and then to use the upgrade tool to turn them into tree-lined streets, or streets with a tree median, or one-ways, or whatever you want to use that you think is appropriate for these streets. But the idea for me here was just to get the circles down as good as I could and as circular as I could, to try to be as close as possible and true to Howard's design. If you look closely at Howard's design, there are some connecting roads that go in between these concentric circles that connect them, and making sure you're starting at the right angle so that they are, I don't know what the correct geometric term would be, but that they continue at an angle that radiates directly out from the central point. Otherwise, I think it would start to look a little bit off and just wouldn't look right. I mean, again, mathematically, this is so precise that you've got to have your angles correct. So I created some of those longer, closer together connection points, because again, the best way to avoid traffic problems is to create lots of connectivity between these concentric circles. And now I'm going through doing some upgrades on the roads to make them pretty in a way that I think A, will work and have enough lanes for the traffic, and also look good enough and have the trees and everything so that even somebody like Ebenezer Howard would say, yeah, that has a good town country sort of feel to it. So I think you get the idea. I didn't want to go through and recreate this exact same street design around the entire circle, so I just kind of kept it at this one segment. But you get the idea. This leaves plenty of room for development inside those, and just following Howard's model, you know exactly where to put your residential, where to put your shopping, and where to put your industrial. So it's a very easy thing to duplicate in City Skylines. So here are some takeaways. Sir Ebenezer Howard for City Skylines. First of all, the concept of regional planning. So many City Skylines players are doing a city, but most of these maps, especially if you're using something like 81 tiles, unlocking all 81 tiles, you have a massive, massive land area, and inevitably you're not making one city. You're making one central city connected to a number of other micropolitan areas. So look at your cities and look at your maps not from building one city, but building a region, building one central area, and then a number of towns, micropolitan areas with their own downtowns, their own identities, their own economies that are also self sustaining. Make sure they're all well connected, not necessarily just with highways, although, of course, nowadays highways are critical. In Ebenezer Howard's days, the car was not nearly as widely utilized as it is today. Utilize all those awesome new things we have with the mass transit DLC, and make sure your micropolitan areas are all connected together. Otherwise, you risk some serious traffic issues, among other things. So, self-sustainability, that just means each one of these micropolitan areas has its own economy, enough jobs for the residents in that micropolitan area. They're not relying on having to get from there all the way to another city just to find work. That was an important concept of Ebenezer Howard's, and again, because his people back in that time did not have the ability to travel great distances just to get food or to have work or whatever else they needed to do. They needed to have a small area where they could travel, often by foot, and get everything they needed to live comfortably. The second thing I would point out is his street layout design. From a broad scale, meaning that big regional look we took, all of his lines are dead straight, connecting all those micropolitan areas, but they're not in a grid. They're intersecting at different angles because they're each radiating out from a point. And then if you go into a much more closer look, you see that there are concentric avenues, meaning there's circles around a center point, and then intersecting with radiating boulevards. So a hub and spokes, like a bicycle wheel. That is an efficient way to connect. And without those spokes and frequent spokes going in, you end up with tremendous traffic problems, especially with the assumptions that City Skylines makes about how much automobile traffic to expect per resident. So make sure you have those connections, those spokes, those straight boulevards and straight avenues that go right to the center of the city or directly out to the nearest other micropolitan area. And utilizing another thing about highway and rail, driving a highway or a rail line directly through the center of your city is nice if you want to have stops in the middle of the city, but highways and rails serve as walls that are difficult to cross, not only for cars because you have to have underpasses or overpasses, but for pedestrian traffic as well. So try to keep highway and rail tangential, just slightly on the outside, connecting on the outside of those areas, and give people easy access to them to get in and out of the city. And that was something that Ebenezer Howard's circular cities were very good at. The major stops were tangential. They were just on the outside of that circle, and there were some small access points to get from one side of that circle to the other. And some of his concepts had broader than others. But anyway, these are just some ideas that you can take away from Ebenezer Howard's work that I hope you will make City Skylines a lot more interesting. I hope you liked this video. I hope something in this gave you some new ideas to apply in your game. If so, please drop me a comment, click the like button. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. I'm going to have lots more content coming out, including some more stuff from my own city, Sanriella Island. So be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, be good to each other. My name is Ferris.